All right, guys, we're moving east into China. Um, Today we're going to be covering China and some of India. We're going to be talking about Buddhism, Taoism, all the good stuff. So, early Chinese culture. One of the things that's fascinating about China is the consistency in a lot of things that we see within Chinese culture. So much has been stable. Um, Despite the fact that we've got dynasties in and out, etc., a lot of things have remained stable, especially the language. The written language now looks a lot like what it looked like in ancient China. If you look there on page 226, you see an example of that. How closely current characters represent the ancient characters. Um, and that type of stability is something I can't think of any equivalent that we have to that in the West as far as that type of as far as that type of consistency. Um, Now, the thing with their writing system is that it is representative. So, a single symbol, much like the hieroglyphs of Egypt, right, represents an entire word, and you have a completely different hieroglyph or a Chinese character to represent something else. It's not based on phonetics. It's not based on sound like English did. Um, One of the things that we see is the Chinese used to use bones, right? And they would heat up bones, and those bones would crack in particular patterns, and then oracles would try to read the cracks in these patterns. So that was a fascinating way of trying to tell the future. Um, the Qin dynasty was our earliest dynasty. This is where we start to see the some of the language come. Um, and then we have the Shang dynasty starting about 1700, lasted for almost 700 years. Um, we talk about the Nile as being important to the culture of Egypt. And in China, the Guangzhou, or what we call the Yellow River, is equitably important. Um, the priests of the Shang Dynasty were very much uh, into reading the bones, um, and the first book of classic Chinese literature is based on this tradition of reading the bones, the Book of Changes. Um, One of the concepts that has lasted for so long in Chinese culture is the idea of balance, right? Always seeking this point of balance. And when something gets out of balance one way, they firmly believe that it's going to come back and find that point. We see the yin yang symbol. Notice within the yin yang symbol, even within the white, it's not just that the white is faced by the black on the other side, but there's a dot of black within the white and a dot of white within the black, showing this constant ebb and flow, the male and female, right? Yin, soft, dark, moist, yang, hard, bright, dry, right? These two quote unquote opposing forces, yet you can't have one without the other. Um, the Chinese went through the Bronze Age just as the West did. Um, Very much comparable time frames. Um, in 1027 BCE, the Shang were overthrown after, again, a period of 700 years of rule. Now, if you think about that, that's like 700 years ago was 100 years before Columbus sailed for America. Okay, that's how long this dynasty lasted. So it just epic in its scope. They were overthrown by the Shao. The Shang believed that their leaders were uh, the sole conduit to heaven, um, but the Zhao basically believed that the empire had lost the mandate of heaven, that they were no longer deemed worthy. Um, Despite this, they ended up intermarrying with the Shang. The Zhao intermarried with the Shang in order to kind of form this idea of legitimacy. And where things like the Yin Yang symbol and the Book of Changes were written during the Shang dynasty, the Zhao really codified them and made them an integral part of Chinese culture moving forward. Um, the Zhao were a very cultural people. There was an era of high poetry, high literature. Um, they the bells we often associate bells with Chinese music. Um, they and the sets of bells that were made during that time, these bronze bells, were just extraordinary. They were capable of making multiple tones, which is just fascinating. Okay, Taoism. Um, so the Tao, very deeply embedded into Chinese culture. It's uh, formed in nature. Um, and Lao Tzu uh, was the originator of this. It's not originators, again, certainly the codifier, the one who put it into code of this religion. Um, this argues for this idea of nature having energy and matter, and that these two things come back and forth. So we think of this idea of chi, right? We hear it so chi ki. This idea that you have this energy inside you that can be uh, brought into alignment. Okay. Um, people who follow this, they live a simple life. They eat simple foods. They live in, not focused on material possessions. Um, there, there's a desire behind this to move beyond the physical and into the spiritual, past matter and into energy. Um, the Zhao were ruled until about 771. Internally, they started kind of feuding with each other. Things started falling apart until about 221. Now, during this time, we have, of course, Kongxi or Confucius, right? Confuci, um, who introduced Confucianism. And a lot of things can overlap between Confucianism and Taoism, but they are uh, different belief systems. Um, Self-discipline, proper relations among people. How do we get along with each other? How do we form relationships? If you live a virtuous life, then you'll live in harmony with those around you, um, both family, within your city, and with other cultures. Self-control, reverence for one's elders, virtuous behavior. All of these are practiced by the followers of Confucius. Um, Analectics is the book created by his followers uh, that, again, kind of codified, put into code what he believed. And by code, I don't mean like something that you have to decipher. I mean a set of rules, okay, that describe what he believed. Um, the work of Taoism is more spiritual, whereas the work of Confucius is more how do you live on a day-to-day basis. Um, at the heart of Confucius' teaching is the idea of li, the propriety and the conduct of the rites of ancestor worship. So, courtesy, dignity, which leads to the principle of ren, or benevolent compassion, right? Um, and how to extend this to others. Uh, Okay, day or virtue is the power of the more example that an individual or a ruler can exert through life, and then all of this leads to when or culture. Okay, um, so really moved. Chinese behavior then is dictated not from the outside, right, by a god or a deity, but by the people's own correct actions. It's a different approach, a different thought process. I need to slide on a regular basis here. See if that helps. Okay. Um, all right. From there, we move into the Qin dynasty. Um, and while Rome went out, China consolidated to the center. Whereas Rome was like, okay, hey, we're going to go to these various countries. China's like, okay, we're going to focus on what makes us Chinese, and people that we conquer are going to, everything that we do is going to focus around us and what we do. Okay? Um, we see the replacement of bronze with iron at this time, and of bureaucracies that are designed to keep systems in play. Um, it was during the Qin Dynasty, 221 to 206, very short little dynasty, right? 15 years, um, which really brought these warring states within China, seven different states, into one again. And this is where we start to see the building of the Great Wall. This is to keep the Mongols out, the Mongols were able to sweep through. Their cavalry was second to none. They used short bows from horseback in a way that just hadn't been seen before. The other thing China did, much like Rome, is they built roads. And when you build roads, you end up with a unifying system. Infrastructure matters. And one of the things that people are really pushing for now here in the U.S. is better systems of infrastructure. We don't have the mass railway systems, the passenger systems that other countries have. If you look at China, Japan, if you look at Europe, these large-scale monorails that can cross countries, we lack that. And we see that other countries are starting to build these, and we're behind. So infrastructure matters. This was only feasible through the bureaucratic systems that China put in play, through these layers of government that allowed systems to move forward and to be put in place. For example, the ruts were built to where basically the axles of carts had to have the exact same width, which allowed people to move through ruts and wouldn't destroy the roads. However, the Qin were, despite the fact of the things that they were able to start accomplishing, the Qin, they suppressed free speech. They killed scholars. I mean, it was the things that they gained were at the expense of freedom in a lot of ways. You see, as a result, Orthodox Confucianism, codified by Mencius, who believed that bad character was a result of society's inability to create the proper environment for the spirit to grow. And so the idea is, okay, if you create the proper society, you will have good people. So you have to eliminate anything that does not fall into that category. You have to eliminate things that might allow people to become wicked. Well, in the process of doing that, the government kind of became wicked itself. This is called legalism, okay? And we're seeing that right now here in this country, this legalistic viewpoint, okay? All right, 206 BCE to 220 CE, so a period of 400 years, right? 200 to the negative, 220 to the positive. We see the Han Dynasty, and the Han Dynasty is where culture just exploded. This was an intellectual and cultural dynasty, always threatened by the Huns coming from the north. When the horses that were used by the Huns were just uh, China had nothing to compete with. Um, the the poetry, right? The Yefu is the music bureau, which employed uh, which employed over 800 people. Imagine having a music bureau for your country that had 800 people employed just for the glorification of music. Just amazing. Um, these people were charged with collecting the songs of the people, not just it wasn't to create beautiful music themselves, but rather to collect that which was already beautiful among the people, highlighting folk music, what is being sung, which I think is just a wonderful, beautiful, beautiful thing. Um, this focus by the government on beauty, it, on poetry, on culture, just warms my heart. Um, Women uh, poets and scholars were respected uh, during the Han Dynasty, which uh, not always the case in many cultures. Certainly wasn't the case for a long time in Western culture. That women were always considered secondary for as far as music and poetry. Certainly this far back in most Western cultures, but in China at the time, mutual respect, which is wonderful. Um, the elder family, uh, women didn't have equality. Please don't get me wrong, but they did have respect as scholars and musicians. There's still this. There was still a principle of the venerable elder. If you were older, you got more respect, and if you were male, you got more respect than women. Okay. Chinese housing, looking at kind of some basic architecture, um, a common structure, 4 stories, bottom level, animals, right? You get pigs, catch cows, things like that. Middle two levels is where the family lived, and then you had a watchtower on the fourth floor where you could somebody could stay and look out for bandits, things like that. Bandits, always a problem, right? Um, all right, we're gonna talk. I think there's a place a little bit further on. Just confirming this before I go too far. Yeah, I'm gonna briefly mention the Silk Road. No, I'm gonna get into the Silk Road now. Okay, 5,000 mile road, guys. 5,000 mile road. I drove. I moved from Alaska to Tennessee when I moved to get my PhD. I moved from Alaska where I was getting my master's to get my PhD in Tennessee, and that was 5,500 miles. Okay, so I want you to just think about how long this road was. And where Chinese would take the silks of China and move them all the way to the eastern shores of the Mediterranean. Okay, um, and then they would take goods from the Mediterranean all the way back to China. This People who traveled the Silk Road made a lot of money. Okay, they made an absolute ton of money, but it was dangerous and it was long, and you would be away from home for years. Right, that one venture, one trip could set you for life. Okay, if you had a good trip, it would set you for life. There's also a good chance you could die. Okay, because you're going through deserts. There's bandits. There's Huns or Mongols, right? Um, and it's interesting because the Chinese started traveling this road um, early on, right? To 200 BCE. It was 1,400 years later that the first European, Marco Polo, traveled the road going the other direction. All right. China was so far, oh my God, so far ahead of the West at this time that it wasn't even funny. Okay, Silk Road. Um, let's go back to the Han. Han papermaking. The ability of the Han to create paper was really unsurpassed at that time. The paper was very high quality. They were able to make some just beautiful, beautiful artwork on it. Um, Um, this it and this of course uh, led to just the paper, because you have a tool like the quality of paper, record keeping, which is what you do on paper, the quality of the record keeping was significantly better than just about anything else you found in the West as well. Um, all right. The Han kept fighting. They kept having wars with the Mongols. The wars with the Mongols ended up leading to taxation. Peasants ended up being forced off of their land, um, and then peasants ended up rising up, fighting back, and China's government kind of collapsed. And we entered this period of chaos for about 250, 300 years. Okay, until finally we see, I say about 350 years, we see an imperial dynasty come back. Okay, stepping away from China, let's move a little bit west of China into India. Um, India is so named for the Indus Valley, um, and India India has been a center of religion and, how do I phrase this? Religious fragmentation, just a variety of religious systems, often caused by this clashing of various religions where people pick up a little bit from this, a little bit from that, a little bit from the other, to come together into a lot of different forms of religion based out of others. Um, and a lot of that I think has to do with its unique position. You have China on, you have the Empire of China on one side, you have the West on the other, right? Then these tend to meet in the middle in India, okay? And I think that's probably been a big cause of a lot of why we see some of this religious, I guess, fragmentation, dissemination, best words I can think of. I'm not coming up with the right words there. Um, okay. The cities of India, because India is such an ancient culture, and because it's such a huge piece of land, and because it's so, I mean, India is a subcontinent. It's literally kind of its own mini continent there. Uh, Things get lost uh, in ways that they don't in almost any place else in the world, really. Um, and so, at least not where you have the types of ongoing populations. Um, we see these cities, 6 to 7 square miles, avenues that just vanished for centuries. Mohenjo-daro, um, they had fired bricks as opposed to just sun-baked, right? These were fired in ovens. Um, so the one of the things we see in India, all a lot of cultures have caste systems, but India's became very ingrained in it. And by caste system, what I mean is there are certain levels in society, okay, that you are born into. And if you are born into that caste, you are in that caste. That is where you reside. So at the bottom, you have the untouchables, right? They're not even considered part of society. They're beggars. They are beneath, okay? You have the Sundras, which are unskilled workers, uh, the Vaishyas, artisans and merchants, and the Kshatriyas, which are rulers and warriors. And then finally the Brahmins, and these are priests and scholars. And so India had a deep reverence for scholars. Notice that scholars are placed above the rulers, all right? And again, born into the caste, which means you better be able to back that up, because the last thing you wanted to do was to bring dishonor on your family by doing something else. Um, okay. Um, so the social caste were sanctioned by the religion of the Aryans, okay, um, based on a set of sacred hymns to the Aryan gods called Vedas, written in the language of Sanskrit. Um, and this period then became based on the name of those of the Vedas or the Vedic period. Um, the Vedas, the other book is the book of Upanishads, which is a book of mystical and philosophical texts, and these two formed the basis of Hinduism. And Hinduism is one of the largest and most ancient religions in the world. It predates Christianity by 1,500 years. Um, it goes back almost as far as Judaism. Okay, so this is an ancient religion. Um, there is no single doctrine or set of practices in Hinduism. Um, it's defined by its diversity of beliefs and by its ability to have a diversity of beliefs. Um, the Upanishads argue that all existence is false. Remember, we talked. This reflects almost back to the beliefs of Plato, right? That it's just shadows on a wall when we talk about the cave, and what appears to the senses, is an illusion. Okay, so the individual soul needs to discover the truth, and eventually this truth will free you from this cycle, because Hinduism believes in reincarnation. Okay, of birth, death, and rebirth, um, and to reunite with Brahman in nirvana. Okay. Um, so you have some central gods. Uh, the Brahman were split among three gods: Brahma, the creator; Vishnu, the preserver; and Shiva, the destroyer. They are all one, okay, ultimately, but they're split out among various gods. Um, we think, right, think in the Christian tradition of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, right? That type of idea. Um, Vishnu is preserver, very popular, god of benevolence, forgiveness, and love. Um, and like all the Hindu gods, was capable of taking human form, and which he did a lot to walk among us. Um, uh, characters, uh, characters, and really people, right, needed to react according to Dharma, which is good and righteous conduct, reflecting the moral order. Correct actions lead to harmony. Bad actions can cause bad things to happen, right? Karma. If you do bad things will happen. Don't get too far into that. Vishnu's popularity is also has to do with his celebration of erotic love. And eroticism to Hindus symbolizes the meaning of the self with Brahman. Okay, so um, there's not the Christianity has a tradition of really holding back on eroticism. Okay, sex is often something to be shied away from. It only takes place, behind closed doors, very hush hush. We don't talk about these sorts of things. Hinduism, not so much. Okay, um, so there's more openness. Now, goddess worship is also fundamental to Hindu religion. The goddesses are often recognized by villages as protectors, and the goddess Devi is worshipped throughout India. And without Devi, without female, there is no male, right? And Devi is the incarnation of that concept, to where you must have the female in order to have the male, to have that balance. Devi is synonymous with the concept of Shakti, the primordial cosmic energy, and the dynamic forces that move through the universe. Um, and Shaktism is uh, an offshoot brand, so to speak, of Hinduism that regards Devi as the supreme Brahman, and all other forms, male or female, are just offshoots of Devi. Okay. All right. Um, Buddhism. We'll hit Buddhism really quick. So, Buddhism, uh, was founded by Shakyamuni Buddha, who lived from 562 to 483 BCE, born as Siddhartha Gautama, who he saw suffering, and he's like, how do we eliminate suffering? I mean, just starting from that simple idea, how do we eliminate suffering? He was born into wealth, and he abandoned it to search for this. So he came up with the Four Noble Truths. First of all, life is suffering. Okay? Life is suffering. Second, this suffering has a cause. In other words, there is something there making suffering happen. It is not just happening just for no reason, but it is caused. Number three, and that cause is ignorance. Okay? Having a lack of understanding is the cause of all suffering. Number three, ignorance can be overcome. There is hope. Okay? We don't have to put up with the fact that ignorance exists, but we can do something about it. We can defeat suffering. Or we can defeat ignorance, and by defeating ignorance in turn, we can defeat suffering. And the way to overcome ignorance is by following the Eightfold Path, what he described as the Eightfold Path. That is right view, right resolve, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. Okay? So if everybody practiced all of these things, then ignorance would go away and suffering would cease to exist. All of these, though, very much like in Hinduism, in Taoism, come back to this idea that there's a focus on materiality, and we need to move away from our focus on materiality to a focus on something higher. Okay. The Buddha taught until he was 80, and his followers taught that anybody could achieve Buddhahood. Those who have reached this state of near total enlightenment, but are going to help others get there, are called bodhisattvas, meaning those whose essence is wisdom. Buddhism became the state religion of the Maurya Empire, which ruled India from 321 to 185 BCE, founded by Chandragupta Maurya, present-day Patna on the Ganges River. Ganges, very important river to India. Okay, most cultures are going to have a river that is important to them. For India, this is it. And he expanded the empire west, taking advantage of basically when Alexander died, there's room to expand, and he took over after that. Ashoka established Buddhism as the official state religion. He saw the carnage that he had inflicted in his role as a warrior king, and he's like, this has to stop. And he was known before that as the cruel Ashoka, and he became known as the pious Ashoka. While Rome was busy during the Punic Wars, Ashoka tried as much as possible to have a policy of non-violence. Slaughter and mutilation of animals was forbidden. Sport hunting was also forbidden, though people could hunt on a limited basis for game for food. The most important of Buddhist monuments, called stupas, we see this on 241. 8 of them were built at about 483 as reliquaries, or basically little holy objects for Buddhist remains. And Ashoka dove in to these original 8 and divided them out and kind of spread them out a little bit more. The form of the stupa is considered very symbolic. This dome, right, representing the dome of heaven. There is a small square platform at the center of which are chakras, which signify the banyan tree, where Buddha achieved enlightenment beneath, and 3 levels of Buddha's consciousness: desire, form, and formlessness, that the soul moves through towards enlightenment. And they when you walk through this, you follow a circle, okay, the Buddhist path, and wait as a way for enlightenment. And the whole of this is called a mandala, which is the diagram of the cosmos. Okay. We see the gates, okay, decorated with stories of the life of Buddha. There are yakshis, okay, which are female spirits, symbolizes the productive forces of nature. So sexuality, spirituality are represented here as comparable cosmic energies. We see the pillar. Ashoka also erected pillars to Buddha. They're inscribed with inscriptions that relate us back to Dharma and the rules of conduct. Okay. All right. Our next meeting, our next class, is going to be on the flowering of Christianity. Make sure that you are keeping up with discussion boards so that we don't have to drop anybody for not showing up, because those discussion boards, as mentioned, are your attendance. All right. Thank you all very much. Have a beautiful day.